even to being on the West Coast, I'm not a West Coast guy. It's totally different out here, wrestling wise. It's so much better, in my opinion. There's so much more variety.
No,
It's just a different mentality. But
when that's the influence of
yes,
WWE on wrestling in general, and there's so many people that like Vince McMahon winning, like I heard, I think it was Cornette that said this actually. It's a great statement. Killed a generation, probably not two generations of booking
mm-hmm.
minds,
Yeah, accurate.
right?
Yeah,
Because now people have come up just thinking the McMahon way is the way,
yeah.
and you don't get enough of that alternative perspective, which we're starting to get now. And I like AEW and all, but like I watched the Abaddon thing the other night, and I'm like, this is garbage. This is why I don't watch WWE. I hate this. This is the stuff I bitch about on the Impact show every week. So
It's
yeah,
a
I get
newer
it.
phenomenon. It's not. Yeah, like I'm thinking, if you're 21 years old right now, you were born maybe even after 9/11.
2000.
That's weird
Mm-hmm.
to me. And but
For
like
sure.
a lot has happened. A lot has happened each year. So there's a bit, and God, there's so much fucking talent, or not talent, but what's the word? Content to go through, to dig through. YouTube and
Oh yeah.
I'm sure somebody who's 20 years old thinks something that happened 20 years ago is ancient, but it's not only not ancient, but it's just like so much happened before
To
that.
be
And
to be fair, when I was in 2000, I was 20. Something that happened in 1980, like Bob Backlund's WWF title reign, to me seemed like it happened
that was my
eons
dad's
ago.
generation.
Yeah, like I get it. I get why people would think that.
So but yeah, but the other thing is there was just a lot less wrestling, and we could focus on what happened. I used to love reading the PWI almanacs just to read the pay-per-view cards because there weren't that many pay-per-views that had happened. There were enough to put in a book. I mean, now it's just like, you have to go to an internet database for it. But like pay-per-views, you could count them on your fingers for a while, at least when I was growing up. So it was,
Oh yeah, four. And then I remember when King of the Ring came, was like, whoa, a fifth
yeah,
pay-per-view. And then I started following WCW. It's like, they have
yeah, that was a
six.
lot.
These people are madmen. Yeah, so I'm like, these people are
And it was really
lunatics.
special
All
when
these
you'd see
shows.
something like Pancrase or UFC or ECW later on, like
Mm-hmm.
because those were going to be big money makers for companies, and those,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, geez, it's just different. Like now, you, you
Different world.
you press. I hate sounding like I'm just doing the luddite uh, gimmick here. I don't mean to, but just pressing one button gets you a lot more than anything that I could imagine when I was like 15, 14. If YouTube or WWE Network had been around when I was in high school, I 100%
It
would
failed.
have just been, I couldn't get through anything. I don't know. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was wasting
I
time with
joke.
tapes.
Oh yeah, I joked with my dad. I'm like, if we had WWE Network when I was in junior high, I
I
failed.
know.
I never would have gone to
It's just
school.
there's
I
so
never would have gone to
much
school.
there's
It'd have
so
been
much to
awful.
watch. And it's not
I would
and
have watched
if you
everything.
like other sports too, everything is available on ESPN or
Mm-hmm.
the league's streaming service. I've heard rumblings of companies like Nike getting into the streaming industry with, sponsoring
That's
athletes.
fascinating.
That's I think a little bit farther down the road, but I could absolutely see companies like that who sponsor talent. That means
Mm-hmm.
they would have, you know, somebody like Brock Lesnar would, I could see doing something like that, licensing his work to not just a wrestling or mixed martial arts company, but like his company that sponsors him in all different kinds of ways.
That is no different than what boxing has been for the last 30 years,
Yeah.
right? Where like guys like guys are the promoter. It's not so much the promotion as it is the promoter, right? And a lot of like look at, I think it was, oh god, I'm blanking on the name because it's late. Mayweather promotes his own fights, right? And that's why that's where he gets all the money. So why wouldn't you? I mean, that's no really when you think about it, it's a roundabout way of how it was in the territories. Vern Gagne was the promoter and the
Hmm.
talent,
Yeah.
you know.
Uh,
Doesn't Would not surprise me if we saw something like that
but
in time.
so yeah, back to ROH, who probably should be getting in on this idea of like, getting that library together and getting something good for it.
Dude, they need to, because I don't know if people realize how much trouble Sinclair is in right now. And they've been in trouble for a few years. They tried for that huge deal with WGN here in Chicago that failed, that the government said, no, too big. You'd have too much control. over the media. So they said no to that. And since then, they bought those regional sports networks, and they took a loan on something like $4 billion.
Yeah, and something like ROH is so low on the totem pole that it's like it's going to
Oh,
be one of the first things to get chopped.
for sure, so low, but the money that ROH costs to run is like
Right.
nothing in comparison to what they owe. But at the same time, it's like, well, we owe this. What can we get away with? I actually, this might be a little bit of a controversial take on this. I don't necessarily think what I don't. I'm not going to try to sound like a bootlick or anything like this, but I understand what they're doing. ROH never made sense to me in how they were making money, really, in that they were paying these guys like top 10, like like good contracts. Like they were competing with WWE and AEW to sign people, but then they weren't doing the things that WWE and AEW were doing to promote their talent, right? So that's never made sense to me.
It's changing. We can't just think about it. We can't compare it to 20 years ago.
But I mean, no, you can't. Absolutely, you can't. But I mean, they weren't really promote like their show is not must see TV. They only run small. You can call them arenas. They run like field
Right,
houses,
right.
right? How are they ever going to make this money back? It never made sense. And I think if they just go the way of PWG and try to just be a super indie, and if they do have a decent budget, they can pay people well to do a month of
If
TV
that is the
tapings. It's
plan,
not a
if that's the plan, they could
if that's the
no, I
plan.
think if that's the plan, I think it's actually a very good plan
Yeah,
because it's like
me
think
too.
about it like PWG with a much bigger budget and more
Hmm.
distribution.
Right. And I think that people aren't looking at like no like the talent is going to lose a full-time contract, which sucks, and I get that. Being a full-time salaried employee is great, but I mean at the same time, like I just don't, and I'm not sympathizing for ROH. I'm just like it never made sense to me how they're making money. It just doesn't
The money
click,
was there,
right?
but it wasn't earned.
Yeah, so it's like how long can that
It
last?
lasted. Well, we saw it lasted as long as Kenny,
Yeah, that's the
Cody, Young Bucks, Hangman Page, and et al. I mean, it was as hot as they were. And when those guys
and then
left, they stayed hot, and
they limp
ROH, you know, passed
Mhm.
gas.
ROH has limped through the last 2 years, and the pandemic probably ushered some things along. But at the same time, so if because again, you shouldn't lament what Ring of Honor was. You should see what they can be. I mean, if they can be an indie, like rather than paying a guy, 10 grand a month, right? If you're on a $120,000 deal, and that might be kind of high, but let's say like Roosh was on a $120,000
I
deal,
think
or
those two
Bandito,
were
right?
close to something like that.
So that's 10 grand a month,
Yeah, and
right?
it was most. I feel I don't know why, but I feel like it was more so to. It was trying to keep ROH in this bidding war, just stay relevant. To say, yeah, we can take big stars
Yeah,
too.
we can exactly. And now you're giving a guy 10 grand a month to work how
And
many times a month? Like, and now you can just go, hey, because all we're gonna do is run TV tapings. Here's 5 grand. You just saved your. And again, most guys go 5 grand for a weekend.
well, a
I'll do
lot of
that.
wrestling that
You
became that
know?
was the other part of the Joey Mercury story when he became a crusader against ROH, and he became a crusader
Oh, I
for
remember
that was
that. Yeah.
the finale. He became like you know just the champion, the white knight hero with a cape, I'm sure, and he was trying to expose ROH's uh, I don't know what he was trying to say, like um, unethical business practices of not paying the women, and basically that was that him talking about that on Twitter led to a guy at Newsweek. He talked to a guy at Newsweek, and there was this big story on it about.
That
Well,
I
that's
don't
how the whole
remember.
Kelly Klein stuff happened because he and Kelly Klein and maybe some others, I forget, they spoke to this reporter at the Newsweek website, and it was about how Kelly Klein, and she said she only makes $20,000 a year, and there were people. I don't think this was in the article, but stars like Flip Gordon would make something like 90K, but it would be. I know that her contract wasn't just $20,000 a year; it was just per match. So it's not like she was working 30 days a month, yeah, 30 days a month or anything like that. 20K would even out to she got paid X at this and Y at that, and I think a lot of contracts were kind of like that, like per date, not something like a WWE's deal where it involves TV and what it like you can't show up on any other shows. it's not much of a TV contract as much as it was like you're scheduled to work these dates and you will end up
Yeah.
getting paid this much amount of money.
So it's like a manipulation of the
Yes,
truth,
it well
but at the same time,
that was
it's
the key.
not, but it is.
Well,
Yeah.
what happened?
Hmm.
I don't know the details, but what ultimately happened was B.J. Whitmer. Remember him? He was married to Kelly
Hmm.
Klein. Well,
Hmm. I remember
and
this.
then I
Yeah.
guess they found out that Kelly Klein was with Joey Murphy.
Kelly and Joey were having. Yeah, Kelly and Joey were
Well,
having
they were
fun.
having fun, and I think it was based not around love, but I think it was based more around
Yeah.
drugs. But
Yes.
I don't know the full story, so I can't point fingers and say anything exact. But from my
Speculation, but
experience
that's
throughout
been.
my life, personally, I've known and been close with a lot of drug addicts, and I know a drug addict. You could smell that behavior in 2 seconds. I can at least, and it's nothing special. And I've had a lot of my life kind of messed up at times by idiot drug addicts. Uh, so that's kind of why it stuck with me because it's just like, oh, this kind of stuff again, and it's not just in wrestling. It's a thing. It's a thing all around the world,
Hmm.
and
For sure.
that's what happened. And both kind of disappeared into obscurity. And I hope they're not dead or anything, but that's the story. And ROH did sort of recover, although the pandemic wrecked a lot of things, but
Let me throw another thing at you. Do you remember that ROH had hired Marty Skrull as their
that's
booker?
a whole
He
nother can of worms. And
and that really never came to much because of the pandemic, and we had the
the
speaking out
speaking
thing that
out thing is
happened.
what did it.
Yeah, but that's when he got like the X, but he never really had a chance to implement anything for better, well, for worse, or for better, actually. But I mean, like for the probably better part of the company too, is we never had a chance to like see what Marty Skrull's vision for Ring of Honor would be because the man's grossness tanked his own career. So, but that's another thing of like the company's been on a bit of a rough streak for a while. Because there's a big thing too around the at the Garden Show. People are like, oh, Matt Taven should have put over Marty
I
Skrull.
don't
That
think it was his
company's
choice.
gonna die. No, that's people don't get that sometimes. Like or the other Matt at Ring of Honor for that reason. It wound up being oh, that was the right call.
Right,
It's
yeah.
just
In the
because
end.
it's just in the end that's 100% the right thing to do. But again, another thing is they kind of hitched their wagon to Marty Skrull, and Tony didn't bring him in when people assumed that they would bring him
Well,
in.
you could think about it like
Um,
that, or you could think about it like he didn't choose to go there. I don't know. I don't know the deal.
there's a lot of
Well, they
choosing.
offered
Again,
him
I'm
a
just saying it didn't happen.
pretty cushy financial, deal.
Ring of
Ring of
Honor.
Honor did to be a kind of like player
Hell yeah, they
coach
did.
sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and it's you got an old school like that's a territory gig, man. Come in, be the top guy and the
Yeah,
booker.
I mean, we can judge,
It's the Eddie
we can
Gilbert job.
judge, like things are tainted because of things outside of his career. But if
There were. I wish. I mean, I'm not going to say it's like I'm saying. I wish that he had given him a chance.
mm,
I'm not. I wonder what Ring of Honor would have been if things were different,
yeah,
right? If say Marty Skrull isn't a gross human being, and if he had not done the things that he had done, then things played out the same. Like what is Ring of Honor under Marty Skrull creative? Like probably the results are probably the same because everything that's happened has zero to do with creative and everything to do with the fact of an international pandemic that's currently causing global supply chain issues across the planet. So I mean, like it's not like this is unique to wrestling.
well, I will never know because I think a lot of it would have been based on not just big indie stars, but international stars too. They brought in Slacks, they had Bandito,
They
but
did.
we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did was they defaulted back to the Delirious dude, and it was exactly the same as it was.
Yeah, it became the
It's
same
more,
exact
it's
company it's
homie
always been.
deals, and I don't know anybody who's jonesing for another Vincent versus Matt Taven match, and I'm not a Matt Taven hater. I loved what
No, I like both
Matt
those guys.
Taven
Yeah.
did during 2019. He was, despite what a lot of people will say, I watched every single show. He was always consistent. He did what he had to do. I've seen him get over. I've seen him get over huge in Mexico. It's just he has to be put with the
Mhm.
right people in the right context. I think he'd be great in AEW. He's perfect for that.
Yeah, but there's no in AEW. He's just a dude,
Unless he's put in the
And the
program. Yeah,
problem with
sometimes you had to gamble on some people.
yeah, and ROH did because he was loyal at a time when everybody else was bailing, and Mike Bennett had bailed, and everyone else was out. So I get it. I get they took a chance on the guy, and I don't have a problem with Matt Taven. I think he's better than people give him credit for, but I don't know if he's the
The booking,
guy.
I
You
remember
know?
just him, like him and Mark Haskins had one of the best matches you could have possibly seen that year, but was just destroyed by a lame Bully Ray schmaz ending, just like popping the balloon, 100%.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. And then the Bully Ray is a great example of, like, I'd say this about Jimmy Jacobs on the Impact show all the time, where it's just like, I get tired of these WWE guys bringing WWE influenced stuff into these companies, right? If I wanted WWE, I'd be watching WWE, and I'm intentionally not watching WWE. Like I said, gets me mad when AEW does it. But again, Vince's DNA is so all over pro wrestling right now. It's going to take a full generation for it to really process out.
It's going to be
You
slow,
know,
but yeah, you're right. It's
it is.
like
It is.
the people that are a decade younger than us, there's a bigger disconnect between, like, when we were kids, there wasn't as much of a disconnect between the fans because there wasn't as much of a gap.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
So we just got to I think you just got to call the companies out when they do it. Like, hey, this is dumb. Don't do it. And again, AEW is usually pretty good about
No,
responding
yeah,
to the criticism and
I
trying to
think
be
most
better.
companies that aren't WWE right now, I think
Yeah.
they're, I think that's a part of every single business, not just wrestling, but anything around the world. The idea of flack,
Listen to your client. Listen to your customers. Yeah.
integrating flack into, like, this is going to happen no matter what. You can be, Saint Michael, the greatest angel of all time, for any Christians out there, and you know what? It won't matter. It doesn't matter. You could be, and you're always going to get flack. It's just a new part. It's this how people or non-people are. It's just people are, especially on social media, they're horrible. And
Oh yeah.
so I really think that flack needs to be integrated into thinking. Like, you have to expect it. You have to expect catching shit all the time because people want their slice of the cake too. And that's a reason, that's a way people are getting their slice of the cake. They're going through the back door, through online campaigns, putting their face in front of campaigns. It's just what it is. And that's not like a negative or positive. It's just clearly that's how our world is right now because of how technology shaped itself, because of how politics have turned out in the past couple of years. We're living in a different world,
Mm-hmm.
more different than when I was growing up, more than ever.
Oh,
So
for sure. For
so
sure.
everything that we knew a lot of it needs to go in the garbage, and we need to go forward. And with wrestling is like, last month's old milk.
Wrestling is always the last to adapt.
Wrestling's behind comics.
Right.
That's bad.
Yeah. And comics is true. And comics, the reason comics is behind trends is because comics take 6 months from the time something is created to the time it hits
Even
presses.
longer sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
Even longer sometimes depending on the company. Yeah, you're right. Like months to a year to get something out. But wrestling is just because it's always run by, it takes a long time. Like it takes a long time to be able to accrue the will to run a wrestling promotion, right? So it's always behind the times because old people usually have those positions.
And it's also, especially with wrestling, it's not so easy uh, to express your platform. Although AEW, because the people that work there have a passion for wrestling and do know what they're doing, that's come across kind of faster than ever, faster than any other company.
Yeah.
We went from having one Dynamite a week and pay-per-view every now and then suddenly to like AEW's on every freaking day.
It's hard to keep pace with AEW sometimes because they're like, we live in a media space where content creation is what's more important. Like even in what I do with books, the answer is like you need to make more money. Well, write more books.
Yeah.
Right. It's all about consumption. It's really about, just keep feeding the monster. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just that's what people want. They don't want less content. They say, like I hear this goes, oh, there's just too much to watch. I was like, well, people watch, right? It's not on the companies producing stuff to worry about what everybody else is producing because we have to understand it's not 1997, right? There's a lot to watch. You can watch anything you want. You can play a video game. Like there's not the captive audiences. We're never going to have the MASH finale again as far as ratings. You and I covered Ricky Dozan and Lou Thez. Nothing will ever do that. Nothing, not wrestling, not the Super Bowl will ever do that kind of a share, right? That's just the past. So you got to adjust.
we have to adjust, but we also, geez, I mean, yeah, there's I have so many different thoughts I want to say, especially because what we were talking about earlier, just like connecting with people, and I don't think like what you were talking about. Yeah, it's not 1987. Because let's talk about just with pro wrestling. Pro wrestling,
For sure.
if you're going to be a promoter right now, it would be really silly to just start a company and approach it like we're still trying to attract casuals walking down the street. That's not the world we live in. It's the you want to find your niche, do it perfectly, do it with all the passion that you have. You have to be passionate about it because people can see through it now, and
For sure.
you have to find your find the connection to the people that like it. Like Bloodsport's a good example of that. Bloodsport is not going to be a television show, but
Nor should it be.
the people that like it, like myself, I love it. You know, you're not going to
Hmm.
miss one. If there's 4 a year, you're definitely going to watch every one. So that's like a springboard into something, but it's not the same. It's not. We don't need to sell at the Pontiac Dome. It's just that's done. Like just like we don't drive a horse and buggy anymore. We don't need like you can do it if you want, but like we don't need to because we created more efficient ways for this world.
Hmm.
And
There's not as many blacksmiths as there used to be, but there's still a lot of blacksmiths around.
everybody
There really
has
are.
to apply.
You
Everybody
know,
has to adapt to what's going on. That's a very Terry Funk kind of way. You have to adapt. You have to his philosophy. No matter what, you have to adapt and be ahead of the game. And especially in wrestling,
which is what separated him from so many of his peers because so many of them were just looking at tomorrow
tomorrow's paycheck. Yeah,
as opposed to tomorrow's paycheck, not tomorrow as in down the road. I mean, like they weren't very forward thinking, which is why Terry Funk stayed relevant his whole career. He didn't complain about this today, blah blah blah. He stayed ahead. Like he stayed just with he had his ear to the ground. He stayed with what's current. He just tried to stay with what's current and make Terry Funk the brand, right? And adjust it to the times. Mike and I were talking about because we reviewed the Halloween Havoc '89 match with Funk and Muda versus Sting and Flair, and we talked about how Terry Funk reinvented himself in '89 as the middle-aged and crazy guy who was just a lunatic trying to get that NWA title back that he held a decade prior, and why that was a great story, and why Funk was so ahead of the curve.
I think Mox is a very modern version of that.
Mox is I heard shout out to our the leader of our tribe, Garrett Gonzalez. I heard him in Meltzer interviewing Mox this weekend. It's fantastic. If anyone's an observer subscriber, I can't say enough good things. Like I know Moxley isn't terribly comfortable doing these interviews, but he's so good at them.
Because he's not hiding anything. Like
Right?
he's
No.
a freed slave sort of thing, the freed pig. He's the like he was at the farm and he escaped. He got away, and now he can be himself.
Hmm. There's a lot to that. Like, I just think that I think you're saying if he's him being the new Terry Funk is totally accurate because there's a lot of similarities there, and I think that that's what makes John Moxley special, right? Is just he could because he played in the WWE system for a long time. It was very successful, and then he can go do AEW and then go be the GCW World Champion and then go do Bloodsport and then go to New Japan and then show up on X indie show, right? There's not many guys like a John
He's a
Moxley.
fans wrestler. He really is.
He
He's
really
like okay.
is.
I don't know if you. I'm going to throw out a musical kind of analogy. Let's see if this works. I always thought it was
Yeah.
cool when there are bands out there that they're popular and they do one style, and on their next record instead of going more commercial, they end up going way against what made them popular. I think of bands like Killing Joke or even like the first Faith No More with Mike Patton and then Angel Dust. It was something like you were kind of on top of the charts, on top of the world, and a lot of bands and artists would go one way and they clearly went the artist's route. And a lot of people, especially younger people now, really recognize that pattern. And they recognize that John Moxley is kind of doing that. He was doing the corporate WWE thing. He escaped, and now he's putting out his heavy stuff, his real stuff. He can express
Let
himself.
me let me throw one. I like that. Let me throw one at you that I think of when I hear this is David
Yeah,
Bowie.
yeah. David Bowie's
Like,
more
cause
Chris Jericho
he
to
was
me though,
oh, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah, you're
because
right. Because he's constantly reinventing the
constantly.
persona and what the brand is. Yeah, you're right. Okay, I get what you're
And
saying. I get
Bowie
what
and
you're saying.
Jericho are also They were
That is good.
more. They were always touching on new mediums too. They were doing things that
Hmm.
Chris Jericho. Remember he hosted a show about fighting robots. You know, he
He
just
did.
does whatever he feels. But that's he's the
Hmm.
Bowie, he's the Frank Zappa, the Prince of wrestling. Because
Hmm.
nobody in wrestling has done that. Nobody. It seems like nobody had the CM Punk sort of did, but he had more.
Punk could Punk